If you've ever been pregnant or you're pregnant right now, you've probably heard this over and over again. You need to take your prenatal vitamins. And for most people, it sounds simple. Just take the pill and move on. But what happens when your body rejects them? Because for some women, it's not like they don't want to take prenatals. It's that they physically can't. Nausea gets worse, the smell is unbearable, and sometimes it just comes right back up. And in that moment, you're left with a very real question. If I can't take prenatals, am I putting my baby at risk? And that's exactly the position I found myself in. During my pregnancies, I didn't take prenatal supplements, not because I didn't believe in them, but because my body simply would not tolerate them. So I had to figure something else out. And what I discovered changed the way I think about pregnancy nutrition completely. Now, before I continue, I want to clear a bias I had. I used to tell myself that our mothers and grandmothers didn't rely on prenatal vitamins because my own experience turned out well. It was easy to say that, but I come to understand even more that that line of thinking is not complete, because some women in the past had healthy pregnancy without supplements, but many others didn't. Complications, deficiencies, and pregnancy losses were far more common than we acknowledge today. We just don't hear those stories as often. So the goal here is not to swing from one extreme to the other. It's not about rejecting prenatal vitamins or pretending that they don't matter. But it's also about not believing that taking a pill is the only way to healthy pregnancy. The real goal is balance and understanding why nutrients like folate matter so much. So then asking a more practical question: what do I do if the standard solution does not work for my body? Because that's where many women are. And that's what this video is really about. A more thoughtful, food-first approach built on understanding and not assumption. So before we talk about food, herbs, or any alternate protocol, we need to understand why prenatal vitamins are emphasized in the first place. Because there's a reason this conversation even exists. One nutrient sits right in the center of it all, and that's folate. Folate is also known as vitamin B9. It is essential for how your body develops in the very earliest stages of pregnancy. We're talking about the formation of the brain, the spinal cord, even before a woman realizes she's pregnant. So even if you are as much as open to getting pregnant, this discussion is important, because I imagine many people are not thinking about pills when they're not actively trying to conceive. They're in that state of mind where they're interested, but they're just going with the flow, right? But when folate levels are low, if the person conceives, it affects the baby's development. And that's why folic acid is usually used. When doctors recommend prenatal vitamins, this is a big part of what they're trying to protect. And where the gap is the fact that knowing that folate is important is one thing, but assuming that a pill is the only reliable way to get enough of it is where the conversation is incomplete, especially for women that can't tolerate pills. So instead of asking, do I take prenatals or not, a better question would be, how do I make my body get enough of what it needs, especially folate, no matter what approach I use? Because once you understand the role of the nutrients, you're no longer dependent on just one method to get it. And that's where we're going next. So let's get practical. It's one thing to say, eat folate-rich foods. It's another thing to actually know which foods, how much of them, and why they matter. So I am going to walk you through 7 foods that you can eat consistently to support your folate levels before and during pregnancy. We're not rushing it, so don't worry. For each one, I'll tell you what it contains, why it matters, and what a realistic, effective portion looks like. So let's start with one of the most accessible and underrated options, the dark leafy greens. Think of foods like ugu, spinach, kale. These are some of the most concentrated natural sources of folate you can find. A single cup of leafy greens can give you between 100 to over 250 micrograms of folate. And these greens also contain iron, which supports red blood cell production and prevents anemia, vitamin C that improves iron absorption, magnesium for cramps, vitamin K for blood clotting. And now, why it matters in pregnancy. It's because you're not just building your baby's neural system, you're also expanding your own blood volume significantly. So nutrients like folate and iron working together becomes very critical. Now let's talk about portions and frequency. A realistic and effective portion is about 1 to 2 cups of cooked leafy greens per day. And I say cooked because cooking reduces the bulk, making it easier to eat more. And in many cases, it improves how your body absorbs nutrients, so it doesn't have to be complicated. You can add ugu to soups, inside your stews, or even water leaf or spinach, or you just stir fry. The goal is not variety for the sake of variety. The goal is consistency, right? So when you eat foods like this regularly, you're not guessing whether you have enough folate. You know that you are building a system that you can rely on. But before we move to the next food, there's something important we need to address, right? Because I just told you need to eat your greens cooked. Naturally, the question comes, doesn't heat destroy nutrients? The answer is yes and no, especially for folate. Heat does affect nutrients, but not in the same way. So for folate, for example, when you boil vegetables for a long time, especially in a lot of water, you can lose the folate into the water. And if that water is thrown away, folate goes with it. But what you can now do is ensure that you do not cook in so much water, right? Because you still need the heat to break down the fibers, make nutrients easy to absorb, and then reduce some compounds that can interfere with digestion. So cooked is a better option, but it's about how you cook, right? So you can use less water. Steaming is better than boiling. Then cook for shorter periods. Avoid overcooking until the vegetables are very soft. If you have to boil, use the cooking liquid in soups or stews, so you're not losing nutrients, you're consuming them. And then if you can stir fry, excellent. So when I say 1 to 2 cups of cooked greens, I don't mean overboiled and drained. I mean gently cooked, vibrant, rich, because again, it's not about perfection. It's about maximizing what you're already eating in a way that your body can benefit from it. Now, with that in mind, we can move on to the next food. All right, now, for the next food, it's something that I personally had and I enjoyed a lot during my pregnancy, and that was plantains. Now, plantains are not the highest source of folate compared to leafy greens, but they're consistent, they're accessible, and they're easy to eat, especially if you're dealing with nausea or food aversions. And that matters because the best food is not just what is most nutritious on paper, but what you can eat consistently. So let's break it down. A medium-sized plantain contains between 40 to 60 micrograms of folate. So on its own, it's not enough to meet your daily needs. But as part of a pattern, it contributes meaningfully. So beyond folate, plantains also bring in some important nutrients like vitamin B6, which supports nausea and supports brain development. Then potassium for fluid balance, helps with muscle function. Then there's vitamin C, which is good for iron absorption and immunity. Complex carbohydrates also provide steady energy, which is crucial during pregnancy. And that's where plantains really shine. So you can take about 1 plantain, a whole plantain, right? But preparation also matters here. Boiled is good, roasted is good, just not too fried that it causes inflammation, but it actually matters how you cook or you process the plantain so it doesn't get unhealthy. Just watch the oil that you are using. And obviously, you don't need to look at plantain in isolation. Think of it as part of the foundation, okay? So let's move on to the next food, which is also closer to the top when we are thinking about folate density, and that's beans. Black beans, brown beans, honey beans, that's a walloy, or chickpeas, they are very high in folate. A single cup of cooked beans can provide like up to 350 micrograms of folate, and you need about 600 when you're pregnant, right? That's a significant contribution to your daily requirements. So, but then again, it's not just about folate. Beans also provides iron, which supports blood during pregnancy, protein, which is good for tissue growth, fiber, which is important for digestion and preventing constipation, magnesium reduces cramping, and Why beans is really powerful is because they are dense, right? They are nutrient dense, they are folate dense. But some people, they don't really tolerate beans that well during pregnancy. So you may not necessarily eat a large volume. You can just taper it, like a little in the morning, little in the afternoon, little in the evening. So you still get your folate volume for the day. A practical intake would be about half to 1 cup of beans per day. Like I said earlier, you don't have to eat it all at once, because for some people, they get gassy, they get bloated. And if that's you, the way you prepare it would matter. You can soak your beans and throw the water away before cooking. And for some people, they parboil their beans, cook it thoroughly, and start with smaller portions, and then you increase gradually. But then again, we're not depending on just one food. We're building layers, okay? So beans is another layer. So let's move on to the next food. And this one is important, not because it's in the highest density of folate, but because of how it supports everything else you are doing. And that's beef. Now, like I said, beef is not a major source of folate, but it does provide a very significant contribution to how your body uses folate that you are getting from other food. And I'll break it down. A typical serving of beef is about 100 to 150 grams, and it contains a significant contribution of vitamin B12, which is essential for red blood cell formation and works closely with folate in DNA synthesis. It also contains iron, a very highly absorbable form of iron that prevents anemia. Contains zinc, contains protein. And why it matters is that, you know, folate doesn't work alone. And for your body to properly form healthy blood cells and support your baby's development, it needs adequate vitamin B12 alongside folate. And this is where the food first approach makes a lot of sense. But if the B12 is low, the system would not function optimally. And that's where beef comes in, because it fills in that gap. About frequency, if you take about 100 grams of cooked beef 3 to 5 times a week, that's fine. It doesn't have to be daily, but it should be regular enough to support your B12 provision and iron levels consistently. Preparation also matters here too. Stewed beef is good, lightly grilled, not overly fried. Incorporate them into your soups, your sauces. All of these work well. Just basically strategic inclusion. Let's now move on to another food. Lentils. Now, lentils is obviously not a very cultural food for Nigerians, so I didn't personally eat lentils much during my pregnancy. But from a nutritional standpoint, they deserve a place in this conversation. The reason is simply that a cup of cooked lentils contains roughly about 350 to 400 micrograms of folate. Now, even if you're not pregnant, that is enough for you. But if you're pregnant, you need about 600, right? Lentils also provide plant-based protein, iron, fiber, and what makes lentils especially useful is the fact that they are efficient. So if you're getting a high concentration of key nutrients without needing a large volume of food, it can be very helpful when your appetite is unpredictable. For portion and frequency, about half to 1 cup of cooked lentils per day is fantastic. So even if you have that a few times a week, it will be good. You can rotate it with beans. And if you don't really tolerate beans better, lentils may be a better one that you can tolerate. But still, soaking helps, cooking properly helps as well. Now, lentils also contains this iron that is not as easily absorbed as animal foods. So pairing lentils with vitamin C can help significantly improve iron absorption. Yeah, that talks about working with food. When you're taking the food first approach, just know that other foods will have to support your system. You're building a system. Another food that is amazing is eggs. Now, eggs are obviously not extremely high in folate compared to leafy greens and lentils, but they play an important role in supporting the food first approach in pregnancy. One large egg can give you about 25 micrograms of folate. So again, it's not a primary source, but it's a steady contribution when eaten regularly. Now, where eggs become more powerful is that they are one of the best natural sources of choline, which is critical for your baby's brain development and neural tube formation. Contains vitamin B12 that supports the red blood cells, high quality protein, healthy fat, and choline in particular is something that people don't talk about enough. Even though it plays a major role in brain development during pregnancy. So while you're focusing on folate, eggs help cover another critical gap. Now let's talk about portion and frequency. A practical intake would be 1 to 2 eggs per day. And for most people, eating a whole egg, including the yolk, is important because that's where the majority of choline is found. And preparation is flexible. You can scramble it, stir fry lightly, boil it. Whatever works best for your appetite is actually good. So then again, it's a pattern that we are building, even though eggs are not your main folate source. They will strengthen the overall nutritional foundation, especially for brain development and nutrient synergy. Moving on to the next food is avocado. Now, I did not personally eat avocado during my pregnancy, but it's currently a staple in my diet. But from a nutritional standpoint, it definitely deserves a place here. Let's break it down. One whole medium avocado contains about 120 micrograms of folate. That is significant, even though it's not concentrated as leafy greens, lentils, or beans. It's a meaningful contribution, especially if you eat it consistently. Now, beyond folate, avocado brings in a very powerful combination of nutrients. It contains healthy monounsaturated fats that support your baby's brain and nervous system development. It contains potassium that helps regulate fluid balance and reduces leg cramps. Fiber helps digestion, vitamin K, vitamin E, overall cellular health. And what makes it very valuable is that it helps your body absorb fat-soluble nutrients from other foods. So if you're eating vegetables rich in vitamin A, D, E, K, avocado would help your body utilize these nutrients more. Now let's talk about portion. I think if you take about half to 1 avocado per day, you don't really need more than that. It's very easy to incorporate. You can add it to meals as mashed avocado on bread, or as a spread. You can pair it with eggs or vegetables, but then again, it's the bigger picture that we are looking at. Avocado is not just about folate, it's about improving the overall quality of your nutrition. The next food, and in this series, the final food in this group, is one that I think is often overlooked, but is extremely powerful when it is used correctly, and that's citrus fruits. Vitamin C rich foods like oranges, tangerines, lemons. If you have guava, fantastic. Now, these are not the highest sources of folate compared to beans or lentils, but they still contribute. For example, one orange can give you about 50 micrograms, yes, of folate. It can range from 30 to 50, but that's not the main reason why they are here. They are here majorly because of their vitamin C content. Vitamin C plays a critical role in helping your body absorb iron, especially the iron from plant-based foods like beans or leafy greens. You know, those ones are harder to absorb. So vitamin C will help activate that system. Without it, you could be eating iron-rich foods, but not efficiently absorbing them, right? Now, beyond that, vitamin C also supports immune function during pregnancy, collagen production, your baby's bones, skin, connective tissues. Then 1 to 2 servings of vitamin C rich foods per day is fantastic. You can take just 1 orange per day or any other combination of smaller fruits. Fantastic. So for example, you can take beans, a side of orange with some ugu on the side. You know, you can squeeze lemon over it. That combination alone is as good as any prenatal. Right? What you have just seen is not just a list of random healthy foods, it's a system. So I've talked about leafy greens, beef and eggs that give you B12 and proteins. I've talked about plantains. I've talked about avocados and vitamin C rich foods that help your body actually use what you're eating. So if you eat like this, you build a diet that supports your baby and creates a foundation for a healthy baby. Now, with all of that in mind, let's talk about the boundaries of this approach, because sometimes it may not work for you and you may need extra support. Okay? And this is the part that some people skip or they get wrong. I have told you that you can do without supplements, but before you jump to that conclusion that I don't need supplements at all, you need to be honest with yourself. What are the limitations? If you are dealing with severe nausea or vomiting, especially in early pregnancy, your overall food intake may be too low to consistently meet your nutrient needs. And remember that that early stage is when folate is most critical for your baby's development. Another situation is appetite inconsistency. Some days you eat well, some days you can barely eat. So when nutrient intake becomes unpredictable, that is a limitation. And then there's also the matter of absorption. Your body needs to properly digest and utilize these nutrients. And not everybody's system functions optimally, especially under stress, under fatigue, or illnesses. So these are limitations of the food first approach. Not about supplement or food. Recognize when food is sufficient and when additional support might be necessary, because the goal is not to prove a point. The goal is a healthy pregnancy. If you can meet your needs through food consistently, intentionally, realistically, it's a valid approach. But if there are gaps and intake is low, inconsistent, compromised, then if you use supplements, you did not fail. You're okay? You're just responding to what your body actually needs. And so now, let's bring it all together in a way that is simple, practical, and doable. Because at the end of the day, it's not about memorizing the nutrients. It's about how you build your meals day to day. And if you're going food first, you are aiming for 600 micrograms per day from combined sources. So that means leafy greens plus legumes plus supporting foods eating consistently, not occasionally. Example, to give you a rough math. 1 cup of leafy greens gives you 150 to 250 micrograms. 1 cup of beans, 200 to 350 micrograms. Fruit plus eggs and others can then fill in the gap. And then you already have about 600 micrograms per day. So a day could be like, in the morning, you can have eggs and plantain. Yummy, just thinking about it. And then later in the day, you can build a meals around beans and greens, like ugu and beans, yeah? And then somewhere in between, take your orange to support iron absorption. And then across the week, you're consistently adding foods like beef to support your vitamin B12 levels. So you don't have to eat everything every single day, but you do need a pattern. You need to be sure that you are adding it up correctly every day. Consistency is more important than intensity. So it's important that you understand what you're doing and you're creating an environment where you are getting enough food from natural sources. Now, let me say this clearly. If you're able to tolerate prenatal vitamins, they can make this process easier. And they can also act as a safety net. But if you're in a position where you cannot tolerate them, you know what to do. So just follow these patterns that I have taught today. You're going to do absolutely fine.